Cool. I think everyone is settling in. So once again, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to another Alan Heath webinar, part of our all-install virtual conference this week. I'm Nick Beretta, Head of Product at Alan Heath. And in this talk, I'm going to explain the concept and the use case behind acoustic echo cancellation and how to set up an echo cancelling system with the AHM64 matrix processor effectively. All of this information is also available as a white paper on our website, so please go ahead and download it from the echo cancelling page of the AHM64 or from our resources page. Also, if you haven't done so already, please check out the full schedule. We still have a full day of sessions remaining as part of our virtual conference. So you can go on the website, register for any session you find interesting. We have sessions to come with our colleagues, Martin and Val, and a hangout session later today, where you can ask any question on any topic that we covered during the week. And equally, you can also book a one-to-one meeting with our tech marketing team or the US team or any other territory, should you wish to discuss a specific project requirement or go into more detail with any of our products. Okay, so one last bit of information about the session today is we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please use your Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom interface to send in any question you might have throughout the webinar. Don't wait until the end. My colleague Val will monitor your questions, and we'll do our best to pick up as many questions as we can at the end. So to start with, why do we need echo cancelling at all? What is it and why do we need it? Well, it's all to do with the most common problem in any teleconferencing or video conferencing situation. And boy, did we have our share of online meetings and video conferences this past year. I think all of us have probably had enough of that by now. But this problem is basically to do with the remote caller, so the person calling in from a remote place, hearing a delayed copy or an echo of their own speech. And that happens because their voice goes through, their voice is basically what we call the far end signal. In echo cancelling terms, that's the far end. And their voice is played back through the local room speakers in our room. It goes through the room impulse response, so the combination of all the reflections in the room, and it's picked up by the microphone in the room, whether it's a webcam or a headset or a conference microphone. It doesn't make any difference. It will still pick up some of those reflections, some of that echo. And once it's picked up by the microphone, it's sent back to the remote caller if there is no echo cancelling in the chain. So that's how we generate the echo. And despite the advances in cloud processing technology with Teams and Zoom and so on, you've probably heard that echo at some point this year in your video calls, and it's a very common problem. So acoustic echo cancellers essentially try to avoid this problem, this echo, by subtracting a simulated echo from the local microphone signal, or microphones, plural, if you have multiple microphones. So the signal from the local microphone is what we call the near end, as opposed to the far end, which is our remote caller. So if we knew the combined response of the speaker and the room reflections and impulse response and the microphone in use or microphones in use, we could simply take that out of the equation, so subtract it from the microphone signal and resolve the problem straight away. Unfortunately, the response, particularly the impulse response of the room, changes over time, changes continuously. So every time you move around the room, you're changing the impulse response of the room. Every time you move a microphone, you're changing that response again. Even opening a laptop in between you and the microphone will change the pattern of the paths of the reflections and therefore the impulse response. So acoustic echo cancellers essentially need to constantly chase up these response. And they can vary in performance and implementation. There are many different techniques. But this session particularly will describe a system that has been designed in-house by Allen and Heath, by a talented engineer in R&D called Jeff Simpson. And it's been designed for use with the Allen and Heath AHM audio matrix processor. However, most of the functional elements that I will discuss today are really common to other implementations as well. So hopefully they'll give you a picture of how AC systems work in general. So to do that, we'll have a look at the key components, and the presentation will get a bit technical, but I think it's useful to understand how the system works first, and then we can go into, okay, what do the controls available to me do in relation to these elements, these blocks that I will be describing now. So again, there are slight variations between different vendors and manufacturers, but by far the most important element in the chain is the adaptive filter. The adaptive filter is continually updated, and that's the one that will constantly chase up the impulse, the ever-changing impulse response. So it will attempt to match the room impulse response and provide the simulated echo to subtract from the near-end microphone. It sounds very simple, but it's a very complicated algorithm, and the DSP engineers really have to use all of the possible tricks up their sleeves to make the adaptive filter work. For example, the adaptive filter is typically an FIR filter, so finite impulse response. And as the system impulse response increases in length, the filter length must also increase to match that. So for a typical adaptive filter length of, say, over 100 milliseconds for an AC processor, the computing power required to implement a convolutional filter of that size is very large. So luckily, there are techniques for reducing that computational requirement, and the most known one is to apply the filter in the frequency domain instead. The trade-off, the compromise with that solution is that any transform of useful length in the frequency domain automatically incurs in latency, so you will have some extra latency. Another trick that we use is normalization. Normalization adjusts the filter update rate based on the amount of energy in the signal. Without normalization, the system would be very sensitive to operating level. So small signals would not be able to produce significant changes to the filter, and very hot signals would cause the filter to become very unstable. So that's what normalization does. And finally, there is another trick that we use, which is called signal whitening. Whitening is a technique where some pre-filtering is applied to the input signals in order to have a flatter spectrum. And that's useful because an adaptive filter by design will converge most quickly when the signal is close to white noise, or exactly white noise. So the whiter the signal, the less likely it is for the correlation of the filter to go wrong. Obviously, white noise is not a particularly useful signal in a video conferencing application, but that's why we try to flatten the spectrum as much as possible of the microphone source. So for the engineers or the nerds in the audience who like to look at all the science behind an algorithm and a processor, the plots in this slide show an example speech sample on the left in the time domain, and you have the corresponding frequency spectrum, so in the frequency domain on the right, and the frequency response of the whitening filter, which is the dotted line top right in the right image. And you also have the resulting whitened spectrum of the speech sample in the dashed line. So you can see that the dashed line in the right chart is a lot flatter, is a lot closer to white noise, if you like, compared to the original speech sample. And that is really what makes a more ideal input for the adaptive filter to improve performance. So the adaptive filter by itself would do a pretty good job at cancelling echo, but there are a few other blocks to help in the process and to improve the overall result. So the first one is an automatic gain control for the far end signal. So this is not for the local microphone, this is for the remote caller signal coming into the room. And that will essentially adjust the gain, attempting to maintain a consistent level for the remote caller. And the gain is not altered unless there is speech present in the signal. For obvious reasons, you don't want to increase the gain when there's only background noise coming from the remote caller. The next element, which is critical to echo cancelling, is the talk state detector. The talk state detector identifies voice activity and any double talk activity, so when both the far end and the near end are speaking at the same time. In fact, in our implementation, it determines one of 4 different talk states. One is the near end only is speaking. The other state is when the far end only is speaking. Then you have a state where both are speaking at the same time, or when neither of them are speaking at the same time. So why do you need all of that information? Well, that information is passed on to several processing blocks, including the adaptive filter. For example, when a double talk is detected, the adaptive filter will stop updating temporarily because it cannot really distinguish between the far end echo and the local talker, the speech from the local room. So the filter would diverge, and that's obviously not what we want. So most echo cancelling systems will show you a block diagram with at least a double talk detector, and very often one or more voice activity detectors, as they are called. In our implementation, and for the sake of simplicity in the presentation, we have combined them into one single block called the talk state detector. So no matter how good the adaptive filter is, there will always be some residual echo remaining in the signal. This is especially true when the room response is changing. So again, moving around the microphone or yourself moving in the room, or when the system has only just been activated. So as you start the video call, as you start using the echo cancelling signal processor, that's when the filter will take a little bit of time to converge. So in those situations, we have non-linear processing. NLP stands for non-linear processing, to implement further processing to attenuate any residual echo. And it will also reduce, as I said, the primary echo while the adaptive filter is converging. It works based on a spectral subtraction technique, where both the far end and the filter error signals are transformed into the frequency domain. Again, a bit more detail will be available in our white paper. And if you want to learn more about the technology, just reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to fetch the answers from our R&D engineers for you. The nonlinear processing also incorporates background noise reduction. Background noise can obviously harm intelligibility and affect the residual echo prediction system. So the background noise signature is estimated, and by signature I mean the spectrum and the characteristics of the background noise. And to prevent any genuine speech from affecting this noise estimate, the estimate is only updated when the near-end microphone is not active, which is why, again, we need that information from the talk state detector. There is also an optional DACA that uses, once again, talk state information, yeah, you guessed it, to reduce the level of residual echoes in case of far end only activity. So when the far end, the remote caller only, is speaking, we can use a DACA to, or basically to gate the near end signal. And finally, we have an option to add comfort noise, to add some noise in the return path. And that's primarily because if the remote caller were to hear total silence in between phrases or sentences from the local room, that could easily be perceived as the line being disconnected or a complete dropout. So that's normally why comfort noise is added, but also that noise helps in the overall performance of the filter, which is why you'll see in the controls that you cannot really completely remove the comfort noise, although you can take it down to minus 90 dB or whatever. And the noise spectrum is shaped to give a natural, unoffensive sound anyway. Right, so that is hopefully a good overview of how echo cancelling systems work in principle. And now we'll have a look at the module that we have available for the AHM64 and how to set it up and to route signals with the AHM64. So this processing expansion module will allow for 12 channels of echo cancelling, so 12 echo cancelling processors, with each channel having 150 milliseconds of echo cancellation. The module is based around 2 Xilinx FPGA devices, incorporating a dual-core ARM A9 processor, each doing a lot of the logic calculations. And because it's based on FPGA and it's cutting-edge technology, you can see that big fan on the module, which is to dissipate the heat and to allow the best airflow within the unit. It fits in the top hatch slot of the top panel, so it doesn't preclude the use of any I/O port expansion like Dante or Waves. And it's what we call the processing expansion module. So let's have a look at how we would route signals to use with the echo cancelling. And this is just a very simple diagram showing where the echo cancelling would sit in the context of input channels for the AHM64. So it would be assigned using channel inserts. We have 2 insert points for every input channel in the AHM64. One is basically pre-processing, one is post-processing. So one insert in the case of the echo cancelling, one insert sits in the far end input channel, and the other insert point would sit in the near end input channel. As we will see later, the near end input channel is not the same channel you would normally use to amplify your own microphone into the local room for voice reinforcement applications, should you need to do so. But I'll touch more on these in a second. So the far end insert is limited to the insert B position, which is the post-processing insert point. Why is that? That's so that it's always after any dynamic processing, because the AC will not work very well or will not work at all if there is non-linear processing between the far end source and the speaker in the room. So we want to avoid all that, which is why we put the insert point where it is. The near end insert is conversely limited to insert A, so the insert A point, which is pre-processing, pre-EQ and compression, so that it's before any dynamic processing for a similar reason. And it's important to keep the gate of that input channel completely disabled. So the gate, again, would interfere with the performance of the echo cancelling. Now, you'll see from this diagram that from the adaptive filter, I have my output going back to the remote caller, but I also have another output, which we call the sound reinforcement output, SR. And this is provided to give that an additional near-end output to before any talk state gating or comfort noise for voice reinforcement applications. So as I said, if you want your local microphones to also feed into your local room speakers to amplify the voice of the speakers, you can do so, but preferably you would use the sound reinforcement output, certainly not the output of the adaptive filter going to the remote caller, because that's with the comfort noise and gating, that wouldn't be the best possible experience for people in the room. You could alternatively choose to split that microphone source or multiple microphones and use a split, an alternative channel to go into the room with the EQ that you require. That would give you possibly the lowest latency solution to amplify your own voice. However, for the best AC performance, you might want to experiment with the sound reinforcement output, which will give you a bit of extra latency, but will also improve the performance of the echo cancelling. So both options exist, and you can test out one or the other depending on the environment and the room and the amount of echo involved. Okay, so what I'll do at this stage is I'll switch to the AHM System Manager software, and we'll log into the unit. I have an echo cancelling module in my AHM64 here. And by the way, these modules are available. We have some ready to ship. The only caveat is that you will need version 1.1 of AHM System Manager and firmware, which you can see I'm running on the screen. It's a beta version, and we hope to have that ready in a matter of a couple of weeks. So once you have your module and 1.1 installed, you can go in, you can set up or play around with the settings of the echo cancelling offline, or you can go online as we'll do now and set up the echo cancelling directly. So I have my AHM64 unit. I click on it. I don't have any password set for the admin user. I'm now connected, and we'll go straight away to have a look at our channels. I have a bunch of inputs for music sources, stereo sources, radio microphones, but also channel 1 and 2, which I conveniently named near end and far end for the sake of this presentation. So near end is my local microphone in the room, far end is the remote caller. Now, in terms of in practical terms, the far end could be a Dante input coming from a video conferencing computer running Zoom or Teams, or it could be an input coming from a dedicated video conferencing system like Polycom or similar. It could be a line coming from a telephone hybrid line for direct connection. That's certainly that was the case when I started in the video conferencing world using ISDN lines and so on. Or it could be a signal from a different room in the same building. So if you're linking two rooms together for a video call or a phone call, or you simply want audio from two events to be mixed together, in that case, you might want to have some echo cancelling between the two rooms. And that would be a signal simply coming from somewhere else in your AHM64 system. And the near end, as we said, is where we'll start today with the local microphone. So if I go ahead and go to the insert A position, because remember that's where we want the echo cancelling to be inserted for the near end. And remember to leave the gate completely disabled. I'll go in here and I have my usual insert options like send and return. They can be analog, digital, but we added an option at the bottom of the page, which is to assign an echo cancelling processor, and we have our 12 processors available. So I chose number 1, and here I have all of the controls for the near end and the far end at the bottom of the screen. So I can go and assign my far end channel at the bottom of the screen, and I will pick my channel number 2, far end, the remote caller. So now the AC is already assigned, and I can start tweaking the controls. So let's have a look at what we have available on the page. You can also see that the way the controls are displayed resembles a little bit the block diagram we were looking at earlier, because it will show you, will remind you of what each control is doing, what each processing block is doing, and where the signal or how the signal is flowing through these processing blocks. So we have the adaptive filter, we can turn it on or off, and the adaptive filter adaptation rate to the right. Now, the best advice with all of these controls for the near end is to test the system and pick the lowest possible value that gives you an acceptable result, that gives you good performance. You don't want to crank all of the settings full scale, just thinking, well, surely that's the best echo cancelling, because that can create some instability and some artifacts. So you want to start from low values and then gradually increase the values until you reach an acceptable result. So the echo reduction, that is the additional or residual echo reduction, so non-linear processing. Again, you can turn it on or off or tweak the value. And the noise reduction, so that's the background noise reduction in the non-linear processing block for the near end. And it actually does a good job at removing background noise in my tests from when I was in lockdown at my kitchen table at home. I played around with the background noise reduction, and I found it to be very effective. So that signal post all of the filters will then go into the optional far-only DACA and comfort noise. So again, you can switch the DACA on or off. You can tweak the level of comfort noise. And that is the signal that you will eventually feed to the far end. So if you look at where my channel is going, this near end channel with the AC inserted, I then routed that channel to the call, back to the call. So Dante to Zoom, or however you want to connect to your video call. And you can also see here that before the far-only DACA and comfort noise, we have the sound reinforcement output available for sound reinforcement applications. And I'll show you in a second where you can find that sound reinforcement channel and how to patch it to the room. At the bottom here, you have the controls for the far end signal for the remote caller, which very simply are essentially the trim, which can be a manual trim or it can be left to automatic. So in that case, we have the automatic gain control in the chain for the to adjust the level of the remote caller speech. You can also see a go-to button here. So if I want to jump to the insert page from the far end channel perspective, so again, this is insert B point after any dynamic processing. You can visualize the same controls, but from the point of view of the far end channel. And I go back to my near end. The other option you have available here is to add another echo cancelling processor for a multi-microphone setup. So let's say that instead of one near end input channel, I have 2, 3, 4, 12 conference microphones around a table. In that case, what you can do is to go ahead and click on Add Echo Cancelling. You can pick multiple echo cancelling processors like AC2. And in this case, you can switch between AC1, AC2, and indeed assign the near end for each one. So the far end would be the same because you're still talking to one remote caller. However, you could pick another microphone for the near end and keep adding microphones that way, so that each individual microphone would have its own echo cancelling processor in the chain. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, maybe in the Q&A, because that's often a question that comes up in terms of multi-microphone setups and why we want to do it that way. Right, so the only other thing that I want to show you here is what I'm doing with the output from these channels, or with these input channels. So if I close the screen a second, and you can see that I have the near end going to the call. So as I said, back to Zoom or Teams, whatever you're using. I have the far end signal going straight into my my room. And that is basically the Zoom caller, the remote caller, amplified into my room. However, into my local room, I could also choose to add some other signals. So if I go to the zone, so that's my zone output for the room, that's my local room, and I'll open my cross-point routing view with all of the sources patched to this room. And you can see, yes, I have the far end from the video call. That's my Zoom caller, if you like. I also have a bunch of music sources or stereo sources, the computer for the presentation, background music, Spotify. You could use a source selector to automate the selection of these. But then you can see here that I have AC1, and that is the sound reinforcement output from the first echo cancelling processor, which you can find in here. So if you go and edit the routing for the zone, you can choose any sound reinforcement output from the 12 echo cancelling processors to be visible as available sources for the room, and then you can go and turn up the level of your local microphones into the room. As I said, that's one way to do it. You could also have another input channel sourced from the same microphone and going directly into this zone or this room, which would be without any echo cancelling in the way, so without any extra latency. But this is certainly the preferred way of setting it up to achieve the best possible performance of the echo cancelling system. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation, and I think we are ready to take a few questions. Val, I think you were monitoring the questions.
I certainly am. So now is an excellent time if you have any queries around echo cancelling, and that might be general questions around the concept of echo cancelling or specifically to our AEC module and its capacity. So the first question, and you did mention it already, is whether it's better or worse, or if I can use multiple microphones sent to a zone and then use the echo cancelling on that zone. If I have, for example, a large room with many microphones for many people, maybe 12 is not sufficient, or maybe I'm using AHM for multiple rooms for multiple calls, in which case I might need more than 12 channels of echo cancelling. What's the best way of managing that?
Yeah, so as I said, there are a couple of ways of doing it. The first one is to mix all of your microphones together like you would normally do, and then you can apply echo cancelling on that total microphone mix for one room. And that's absolutely fine, and that's in fact how many conference systems work. It's also how it would work anyway if you were to take multiple microphones and go into, say, Teams or Zoom in a conference room or a huddle room, and leave and rely on the Teams or cloud processing with echo cancelling provided by the conferencing application, because in that case, all of the microphones are summed together into whatever interface you're using for the call. However, if you can afford to have individual microphones, each with an echo cancelling instance inserted in the input channel, that is certainly the best possible scenario in terms of improving the quality of the echo cancelling and therefore the quality of the call. And the reason for that is that, as we discussed today, each single microphone will have a slightly different impulse response from the room for different paths of the reflections going into the microphone. If you move one microphone relative to the others, you will change all of that again. And so if each individual microphone has got their own adaptive filter chasing up the impulse response, it will work in a much better way than trying to calculate the overall impulse response from all of the microphones in one go. But it's entirely possible to do it the other way as well.
Okay, great. So yeah, it's very flexible, and I suppose that using it that way means that you could deploy AHM with echo cancelling on a multi-room setup in a conference suite, for example, where you've got 6 or 7 or 8 conference rooms, and it could manage them all at the same time, even if you had high input channel counts, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay. And another question that's kind of in the same vein a little bit. If you were in, for example, an auditorium where you had a presenter that was speaking to a room, but you also had a call coming in, does the echo cancelling also improve gain before feedback and that sort of thing? Because obviously the person in the room is not only speaking to the call, but also to people in a room with a speaker reinforcement system.
Yeah, good question. It does, yes, and that's why I mentioned the use of the sound reinforcement output as opposed to just take the same source and go straight into the amplification of the room, which you can possibly do, but particularly in larger rooms with a lot of reflections, if you can take the sound reinforcement output and use that one for voice reinforcement locally, that would also improve your, as you say, gain before feedback. And even attempt to basically suppress any feedback as it starts. Again, I experimented at home because the same technology in terms of the adaptive filter could potentially be used in future for a sort of adaptive feedback suppressor, not based on static EQ bands, but based on the echo cancellation principle, effectively. So yes, it will improve the feedback situation in the local room as well as the echo to the remote caller.
Okay, and then a final question relating to what you were mentioning just earlier on. Sorry, excuse me. What's the best setup in terms of using echo cancellation with a conferencing software like Zoom or Skype or something like that? Does it combine well with the built-in processing? What's the best approach to that?
Yeah, that's a question we got a lot in the last few days as we were announcing the echo cancelling module. I understand why people get interested in that, because a lot of people are saying, well, why do I still need a hardware or a dedicated echo cancelling module when I have already echo cancelling processing going on in the cloud with Zoom, Teams, Skype, whatever they're using. And it's true that these systems have a lot of processing going on and doing typically a very good job at optimizing our voice for calls and applications. There are a few limitations though, and there are some benefits to having a dedicated hardware echo cancelling module. The first one is the multi-microphone scenario we described. The other one is the fact that typically the length of the filter, or the length of the tail, if you like, for those filters in the cloud processing is normally optimized for something like a person talking into a laptop or a portable device or a mobile device, and not considering longer reflections from a larger room with maybe condenser microphones or conference microphones, ceiling microphones, and so on. So that's where a hardware solution can become a lot more attractive. In terms of how the two work together, you have a couple of differences between the apps or software packages we currently use on the market. For example, with Zoom, there is indeed an option in your Zoom settings to switch off the Zoom processing and even to just use the original sound as it is, completely unprocessed. It's called original sound in Zoom. And that will essentially take the sound as processed by your AHM64 and echo cancelling and straight to the remote caller. So that's certainly something you can play with. With Teams, that's not really possible because Teams would only switch off its own cloud processing if you have a certified USB Teams device connected, which is capable of echo cancelling. Obviously, AHM not being a USB device, it would be really difficult for us to seek any Microsoft Teams certification. So you would have to essentially leave that active at all times. Again, we tested that setup to see how the combined AC would work in terms of the AHM64 on one side and Teams on top of that. And we found that actually there's no conflict whatsoever, because what happens is the hardware AC is first in the chain, in the signal path, and will essentially remove most of the echo or all of the echo in the best situation. And the Teams algorithm will then essentially pick up a cleaner signal without any echo, and that's absolutely fine. So no conflict, and you can go ahead and use it with any of these apps without any problem.
Perfect. So it means that you don't have to have any specific knowledge, or you don't have to worry about what's happening on your software, even if you're using echo cancelling. It's fairly plug and play.
Correct.
Cool. Okay. I think that's the most of the questions, which are excellent questions. Thank you very much for those. Nick, I'll leave it to you to close off.
Yeah, thank you very much, Val. And once again, I would just say, if you can spend a couple of minutes to check out the remaining sessions that we have available for you today in our virtual conference, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today and this week, and goodbye.